time to invite you into our briefing room, where we can talk to one of our leading tactical and strategic thinkers about the war in Ukraine. Welcome then to General Sir Richard Shirreff, former NATO commander, who served as Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Richard, good evening to you.
And evening to you, John. Good to be back.
Can I ask you first, if I could, your thoughts on the state of the war as we stand here now?
I think firstly, be under no illusions. This is a very, very difficult time for the Ukrainians. It's getting seriously cold in Ukraine now, -20, or thereabouts, and without heating, without light, without the ability to wash, without the ability to wash clothes, look after children and the like. It's a very, very difficult winter. And this is all because of the Russian terror attacks against Ukrainian cities and against Ukrainian power supplies and the like. So it is extremely difficult. So I think top of the list comes humanitarian support for the Ukrainians and the ability to help them get the power going by whatever means. As far as the fighting, sorry, I'll stop there because I've got more to talk about.
We'll come around to what you want to talk about, because I want to hear what it is you have to talk about. But let me throw in this thought first. Then you bring up the question, of course, naturally, of the attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, which have helped to bring about these freezing conditions, attacked energy supplies and so on. Now, today we've seen Britain and the European Union impose sanctions on some of the Russian commanders behind those attacks, as well as on Iranians who were involved in the supply of the drones used in those attacks. Is that more than a gesture? It surely will not have any deterrent or material effect, Richard.
You're right. It won't have any impact at all. It's not going to stop them. I mean, at the very least, this is attacks against civilians, and it constitutes a war crime. So these are Russian commanders perpetrating these attacks are war criminals, and if they've done worse as well. So this is gesture stuff. I think what's needed is to continue to give Ukraine the tools to do the job, to actually achieve their military objectives, and to put the Russians out of Ukraine. And that must, at a time when there appears to be a bit of a lull in the fighting. I don't think it would feel like much of a lull if you're in Kherson under artillery fire or other parts of the front line under artillery fire. But it's been relatively static since the Ukrainians' significant success by retaking Kherson.
Yes.
Now is the time to ramp up the support to the Ukrainians, because as the ground gets harder, now it begins to be a time of opportunity. And if we can give the Ukrainians the tools to do the job and continue to help them hammer the Russians in their trenches. Remember, Russian conscripts, ill-equipped, without proper winter clothing, they will be suffering equally. Right. And their morale will be pretty dicey. So now is the time to double down on them, undermine morale even further, and give the Ukrainians the means to do the job, which is to break through Russian lines.
So what sort of equipment would be needed to do that sort of job? It's getting colder, the ground is still hard. Is that a cue for tank warfare, for example?
It is absolutely, John. It's the same shopping list that one's been talking about ever since February the 24th, frankly. It's long-range artillery, long-range missile capabilities, ATACMS to allow the Ukrainians to target Russian logistics and the Russians in depth to shape the battlefield. But it's also the capabilities for offensive maneuver operations. So tanks, armored infantry, fighting vehicles, air defense, of course, is critical, as well as logistics, because this is industrial, conventional state-on-state warfare, and it uses up huge quantities of artillery shells, missiles, and other ammunition. So logistics is critical.
Right. So let's talk then about conventional state-on-state warfare, which is exactly what we're looking at here. At an early stage in this war, there was an inhibition on the part of some in the West, like America, to provide Ukraine with the sort of long-range missiles that could be used to target targets deep inside Russia. Does that inhibition hold anymore, given that we've seen the Russian attacks each day unfolding against targets inside Ukraine, and civilian targets at that?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge the American concern that what their principal priority is to avoid a nuclear exchange and to avoid NATO getting embroiled on the ground in Ukraine. And I think that colours the sort of initial inhibitions, thus far, just enough, but not too much. I think the risks of nuclear escalation have reduced. They're still there. It is still a very dangerous threat, but it's not a bluff that we should call from Putin. And therefore, I think the the gloves should absolutely come off, and we should be giving the Ukrainians the means to do the job, even if it means them striking at Russian targets, as they have done. And that's entirely legitimate. They have been attacked by Russia in an unprovoked assault on their country, and they are entirely within their rights to target Russians in depth.
Yeah.
This is the deep battle, and any military commander would be doing that to focus his enemy's attention on that, to distract, and also, really important, to cut off their logistics.
And I'm just looking, Richard, at a comment piece by Edward Lucas, who's a respected authority on these matters and matters concerning Russia, and it backs up your argument absolutely to the letter. Here's this piece, I'll put it to you, a summary. Now, Edward Lucas writes in this new piece that it is cruel, as he puts it, to deny Ukraine the sort of weaponry and equipment you're talking about now, that it would be appropriate, he argues, to send, well, a large number of engineers to help build the energy infrastructure, but behind that, supply the kind of weaponry that would make a decisive victory now, because otherwise, and this is Edward Lucas's argument, I suspect it echoes yours, we're just treating the losses on the Ukrainian side almost as like collateral damage on the way to some sort of negotiated settlement.
Well, I couldn't put it better than Edward Lucas, so I respect and admire and follow his writings avidly. He's absolutely right. And let's be clear also that the more we give the Ukrainians, the quicker they will do the job, and the quicker this war will be, or at least the shooting will stop. There won't be peace, but the shooting will stop. What we cannot, any prevarication, any further prevarication, or any worry about giving them offensive weaponry is only likely to prolong the war, and this war cannot go. We cannot let the Ukrainians go through another winter like the winter they're going through at the moment.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm looking at another interesting report today, and to put this to you now is really very obviously to preach to the converted, but I'm now looking at a report which talks about Russia using 40-year-old ammunition now, some of which is necessarily faulty, which suggests that Russia, in terms of its ordnance and its equipment, is near the end of its tether. Now, the West does not have infinite supplies of this stuff either, but it clearly has deeper reserves than Russia. So a significant resupply from the West now could make, well, militarily, all the difference, I suppose.
It would make absolutely all the difference. Now, Russia will continue to be able to dig deep because it has vast supplies, even if it's ancient Cold War ammunition and capabilities. But let's also be clear, if the West is to provide the capabilities it needs to, then the West needs to mobilize, and it needs to really ramp up its industrial base. And I keep saying this, that the West needs to be prepared for the worst case. And I have not yet seen that political leadership that recognizes that says it loud and clear and in a straight way to our people, that this is something that is all our fight, and we need to make sacrifices to enable the Ukrainians to fight effectively on our behalf. And I know that's a difficult message at a time when things are as tough as they are in this country and other European countries, but it's a message that needs to be conveyed.
Well, I suppose the worst case, I suppose, Richard, is that Russia is pushed to the outer limit of its capability, and the next stage then is escalation, and by which I obviously mean nuclear escalation.
And that's precisely exactly the worst case is war with Russia, which means being prepared for it, and because that is the way to deter it. If we, the West, we NATO, can genuinely overmatch Russia, then this war will not escalate. But we need to be able to convey our readiness as an alliance to absolutely mallet them if they stick their heads above the parapet in any further way.
But that almost, and I'm acting in a sense as devil's advocate here, but you're making almost an argument for forcing Vladimir Putin to contemplate and then to carry out surrender.
Putin will respect strength. Russia only respects strength, and NATO needs to double down and demonstrate its strength. And of course, if it is to continue to provide support for Ukraine, if it's to continue to build the reserves necessary, and of course, that is the objective. It is to defeat Russia. It is to get Russia out of Ukraine. That would constitute defeat. And that is absolutely the right strategic aim to be focused on.
Absolutely fascinating conversation, Richard, but of course on the ground in Ukraine, it is not theoretical. It is wretched. It is hell. It is great to talk to you. General Sir Richard Shirreff there, former NATO commander.